My phone rang again. It was my mother calling for the 5th time, asking about my arrival time. I was returning home by train, and it was already 6 p.m. My train wouldn't arrive at the station until 8 p.m., but my mother seemed unusually excited about my return. I found this odd, but I assumed she was just missing me a lot. Finally, at 8 o'clock, I arrived at the station and headed straight home. As I approached the door, it swung open, and there stood my mother, tears in her eyes. "Oh, my dear son, you're finally back home," she exclaimed. I hugged her, touched by the emotion on her face. We went to the living room, and I sat on the sofa, exhausted from the long journey. "Mom, could you bring me a glass of water?" I asked. But instead of getting up, she sat beside me with a strange smile. "Your water is coming," she said with a grin. Then, a beautiful young woman around 22 entered the room. She nervously handed me the glass of water, clearly uncomfortable in my presence. I took the glass from her and said, "Thank you." My mother's eyes sparkled with pride as she looked at her. "So, Peter, meet Lucy, our new house helper," she introduced. "Okay, welcome, Lucy," I said with a smile. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice quiet. No, don't call him sir. His name is Peter. Just call him Peter, and I'll be very happy," my mother insisted. "Yes, please call me Peter," I said, still smiling. Later we sat down to dinner, and Lucy went to the kitchen for some work. My mother whispered to me, "Lucy is going to stay with us. Poor girl lost her parents last week. She doesn't have anyone to look after her, and her family didn't even have a house of their own. They were renting. I decided to help her. I was already looking for a maid." "Oh, Mom, you did the right thing," I said, touched by her kindness. "But do you know her well? You know how young people are these days, and having a complete stranger in our house." "I know her family well," my mother assured me. After the conversation ended, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to find that Lucy and my mother had prepared my favorite breakfast. My mother sat down with me, but Lucy stood there, looking shy and nervous. "Come, Lucy, let's eat together," my mother urged. "Yes, join us, Lucy," I added. She sat beside me, and for the first time, I really looked at her. Her blue eyes, just like mine, struck me. There was an unexplainable connection. I thought about taking her to the market to buy some clothes, but my mother, looking tired, said, "Peter, could you go with Lucy? I just don't feel up to it today." "Sure, I can go with Lucy," I replied, unsure of why my mother was so eager for us to spend time together. It seemed like more than just helping her buy clothes. At the market, I helped Lucy pick out some dresses. I couldn't help but notice how many things we had in common. Later, at a coffee shop, we talked for hours, sharing our lives with each other. By the time we returned home, it was around 6 p.m. I expected my mother to be upset that we spent so much time together, but instead she was thrilled. She even suggested that I take Lucy to the park the next day. That night before dinner, I couldn't hold back my questions. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you acting so strange? Why do you want me to spend time with Lucy like this?" My mother sighed, then said softly, "Peter, I know what you're thinking. But I love Lucy like she's my own daughter. I don't want her to feel like a maid. I just want her to feel like part of the family." I didn't know what to say. My mother clearly wanted to make Lucy part of our family, and that could only happen if she became my wife. The next day, Lucy baked me my favorite cake as a thank you. After we ate, we went to the terrace. The moonlight was beautiful, and we laughed, talked, and shared moments. As I looked into her eyes, something changed. There was a connection, a bond I couldn't deny. I realized that I loved her. That night, I made a decision. I would propose to Lucy. The next morning, I bought a ring and made preparations in the backyard, decorating it with lights and flowers. I didn't tell my mother, planning to surprise her later. That evening, I took Lucy to the backyard, and when she saw the setup, her face lit up. I bent down on one knee, held out the ring, and asked, "Lucy, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she shouted, "Yes, yes, yes." Just as I slid the ring onto her finger, my mother came running into the yard. "What's going on here? What are you doing, Peter?" I smiled, holding the ring up. "I'm going to marry Lucy, Mom. This is what you wanted for us, isn't it?" My mother froze, her face turning pale. "What nonsense are you talking? You can't marry her. Are you both out of your minds?" Lucy and I were in shock as my mother fainted. I quickly called the doctor, who said she had suffered a panic attack and advised me not to stress her further. When she regained consciousness, I went to her room. "Mom, why did you react like that? You were the one who wanted me to be with Lucy, and now you're against it." "Peter," she began softly, "I know what you're thinking, but I never wanted you to marry Lucy. I wanted you to treat her like a sister, not a lover. I love you like my own son, and I wanted you to protect her, but I can't give you permission to marry her." I was confused. "But why? Why are you against it?" She closed her eyes and said nothing more. The next day, when I returned from the market, I found two guests in the house, a young woman and an elderly lady. My mother introduced them. "This is Alex, my friend's daughter. I've selected her to be your wife." I was stunned. "No, this can't be happening," I shouted, turning to the women. "Please leave my house." My mother, furious, scolded me. "How dare you disrespect our guests? You will marry Alex, and that's final." "But I love Lucy," I protested. "You can't love Lucy," my mother replied coldly. In a fit of anger, I said something I deeply regret. "Then die, Mom." After that, I stopped speaking to my mother. She grew weaker with each passing day. Eventually, Lucy married someone else, and though I tried to stop it, seeing my mother's condition, Lucy decided to leave. My mother cried every day, and the doctor said she had only a few days left. One day, I returned home to find people gathered outside my house. A man came forward and told me my mother had passed away. I rushed inside, feeling like my entire world had shattered. It was the worst day of my life. The day after her death, I found a letter from my mother in her room. It read, "Peter, I know you hate me, but I couldn't tell you the truth. If I had, you would have hated me even more. I never hated Lucy. In fact, I loved her like a daughter, but I wanted you to treat her like a sister, not as a lover. You and Lucy share a blood bond. She is your real sister, and I adopted you from a poor family. I've loved you like my own son, but when Lucy's parents died, I made a mistake. Please don't hate me, Peter. I just wanted to protect you both. I will continue to love you even in death." I sat there, stunned. What was I supposed to do now? What was my mistake, and what was my mother's? Now, I have no mother, no sister, and no lover. What should I do? Can anyone tell me?